a single dark-sailed ship creeps over the horizon toward the harbor of Athens, and on the cliffs above the sea, an old king cannot make himself look away from it. He has kept this vigil for weeks, and he does not yet know that the color of that approaching sail is about to end his life. Far to the south, on an island ringed by cliffs, a maze has been cut into the rock beneath a palace. Corridors folded within corridors, built so cunningly that no one who entered it had ever found their own way back out. Somewhere inside that maze lives something with the head of a bull and the body of a man, a creature fed every 9 years on the sons and daughters of Athens. How does the hero brave enough to walk into that maze and kill the thing waiting inside it, forget the one small promise that could have spared his own father's life? That is the story tonight. The labyrinth, the thread that led a man back out of it, and the black sail that undid everything the hero had won. If you enjoy these stories, take a moment to subscribe. It truly helps this channel, and tell me in the comments which myth you'd like next. Now step back, before the maze and the monster, to where this debt of blood first began. Years before that black sail ever appeared on the horizon, the island kingdom of Crete was ruled by King Minos, a proud and powerful man who commanded the greatest navy in the Aegean Sea. Minos had sent his own son, Androgeos, to compete in the games at Athens, and the young man had proven so skilled that jealous rivals conspired to have him killed on Athenian soil. When Minos learned of it, he did not let his grief pass quietly. He raised his fleet, sailed against Athens, and laid siege to the city until King Aegeus, desperate and outmatched, agreed to whatever terms would end the war. The terms Minos set were merciless. Every 9 years, Athens would send 14 of its own children, 7 young men and 7 young women, chosen by lot from the noblest families in the city, across the sea to Crete. There, in a maze built beneath the royal palace by the brilliant craftsman Daedalus, something waited that was not entirely a man and not entirely a beast. The creature was called the Minotaur, born years earlier out of a curse the gods had placed upon Minos's own household, and it had grown enormous and savage in the dark, sustained on nothing but human tribute. Twice already the ships had sailed from Athens loaded with weeping young people who never returned. Now, as a third 9 years drew to its end, the black-sailed ship was being made ready again in the harbor, and lots were being drawn for who would go. Among the young men of Athens that year was Theseus, the son of King Aegeus himself, a prince raised largely apart from his father, who had grown into a young man famous for clearing the road to Athens of the bandits and monsters that had once made it impassable. When the lots were drawn for the tribute to Crete, Theseus did not wait to see whether his name would be chosen. He went to his father and told him plainly that he intended to go as one of the 14, and that he intended to kill the Minotaur and end the tribute forever. Aegeus argued and pleaded, since he had waited half his life for a son and could not bear to lose him to a maze on the far side of the sea. But Theseus would not be moved, and in the end the old king gave in on one condition. The ship that carried the tribute always sailed under black sails, a mark of mourning for children the city expected never to see again. Aegeus made his son swear that if he survived, if he somehow killed the beast and found his way back out of the maze, the crew would raise white sails for the return voyage instead, so that his father, watching from the cliffs above the harbor, would know his son was alive long before the ship ever reached the shore. Theseus swore it without hesitation. Then, with the other 13 young Athenians beside him, pale and afraid, he boarded the black-sailed ship and set out for Crete. The voyage south took several days, and when the ship finally rounded the coast of Crete, the tribute could see the island rising green and mountainous from the sea, crowned by the sprawling palace of King Minos. The 14 young Athenians were marched up from the harbor and presented to the king himself, a stern figure seated on a throne carved with bulls and waves, who studied them the way a man studies livestock before a sale. Somewhere behind the palace, cut into the hillside, lay the entrance to the labyrinth, a low dark doorway in a wall of pale stone from which, it was said, no sound and no living thing ever emerged. But among those watching the new arrivals that day was someone Minos had not accounted for: his daughter, Ariadne. She stood at the edge of the courtyard as the Athenians were led past, and her eyes settled on Theseus, tall, unafraid, walking toward a fate that had swallowed dozens before him without complaint. Whatever she felt in that moment, it was enough to make her do something no daughter of Minos had ever dared. That night, while the tribute was kept under guard in a stone chamber near the palace, Ariadne slipped out into the dark to find some way of saving a man she had only just seen for the first time. Ariadne went first to Daedalus, the craftsman who had designed the labyrinth for her father and understood its twisting logic better than any living soul. She begged him for some way to help the young man from Athens survive it, and Daedalus, uneasy but unable to refuse a princess, gave her his answer: a simple ball of thread. Tied at the entrance and unspooled as a man walked deeper into the maze, the thread would do what no memory or map ever could. Inside those endless, identical corridors, it would show him the one path back to the light. Ariadne carried the thread to Theseus under cover of darkness, along with a sword smuggled past the guards, and made him a bargain in return. She would give him the means to survive the maze and kill what waited inside it, on the condition that when it was done, he would take her away from Crete and marry her, since she would become a traitor to her own father the moment the thread left her hands. Theseus agreed without hesitation, whether from love or gratitude or simple desperation. The old sources do not fully agree. What mattered in the darkness before dawn was that a plan now existed where none had before. As the sky over the harbor began to lighten, Theseus tied one end of the thread to a stone beside the labyrinth's entrance and prepared to walk into the dark alone. At first light, the 14 Athenians were led to the low doorway cut into the hillside and driven inside, torches guttering in the damp air of the first corridor. The labyrinth was unlike any building any of them had ever entered, passage folded into passage, the same carved stone walls repeating in every direction, so that within a dozen turns, not one of them could have said which way led back to the sun. Theseus left the others sheltering near a junction of passages and went on alone, the thread paying out behind him in a thin, unbroken line across the cold floor. Deeper in, the air changed. It grew warmer and heavier and carried with it a smell of old straw and something worse beneath it, while somewhere far off in the stone came a low sound that was not quite a bellow and not quite a groan, echoing off walls that gave no clue to its distance or its direction. Theseus pressed on with the sword Ariadne had given him, held ready, feeling his way past corner after identical corner, the thread unspooling behind him like the last thin thread of his own courage. He could not have said how long he walked before the passage opened into a wider chamber littered with old bones bleached pale in the dark. Somewhere in that chamber, breathing, waiting, was the thing he had crossed the sea to kill. What happened next, the old poets tell only in glimpses, and perhaps that is a mercy for both the listener and for the thing that died in that chamber. There was a rush of movement in the dark, a shape far larger than a man rising up with a bull's horned head lowered to charge, and a struggle that Theseus later could barely describe, fought half-blind in the near dark on a floor slick with dust and old straw. He was younger, faster, and armed with a sword forged for exactly this purpose, while the Minotaur, for all its terrible strength, had never once in its long captivity faced an opponent who fought back. When it finally ended, the great shape lay still on the stone, and silence returned to the labyrinth for the first time in years. Theseus did not linger over it. He gathered up the loose end of the thread with hands that would not entirely stop shaking, and began to follow it back the way he had come, past turning after turning, until at last he saw the gray light of the entrance ahead of him. The other 13 Athenians were still waiting where he had left them, and when they saw him alive, they wept with a relief none of them had expected to feel again. Together, following the same thread out into the morning air, the tribute of Athens walked free from the labyrinth for the first time in the history of the debt. Theseus kept his half of the bargain that night. Before Minos could learn what had happened to his monster, the Athenians slipped down to the harbor with Ariadne beside them, disabled the Cretan ships so no pursuit could follow quickly, and sailed north into the dark. For a time, it must have felt as though the worst of the story was already behind them. But somewhere along the return voyage, the ship put in at the small island of Naxos to rest, and when the Athenians sailed on from it, Ariadne was no longer among them. The old sources cannot agree on why. Some say Theseus abandoned her deliberately on that shore while she slept, his promise forgotten now that it had served its purpose. Others say the god Dionysus himself appeared on the island and claimed her as his own bride, and that Theseus sailed on because a god had commanded it and no mortal could refuse. Either way, the woman who had handed a stranger a ball of thread and asked only to be taken away with him woke alone on an unfamiliar shore, watching a ship she was not on grow smaller against the horizon. Theseus sailed north toward home, carrying a victory that had already cost him something he did not appear to notice, losing. It would not be the only promise he forgot to keep before the voyage was over. On the cliffs above the harbor of Athens, King Aegeus had kept his own kind of vigil since the day his son sailed for Crete, watching the horizon each morning for the shape of a returning ship. Whether from grief over Ariadne, or the exhaustion of the long voyage home, or simple carelessness after so much had already gone right, Theseus forgot the one instruction his father had given him before he left. The ship that finally rounded the point toward Athens still flew its black sail, the same morning color it had carried south, though everyone aboard it was alive and coming home in triumph. Aegeus saw the dark cloth from the cliff long before the ship was close enough for anyone to shout the truth to him. He had waited weeks for exactly this sight, certain it could only mean one thing, and rather than face the death of the only son he had ever had, the old king threw himself from the cliff into the sea below, the same sea that has carried his name, the Aegean, ever since. Theseus came home a hero who had ended a 9-year debt of blood and freed his city from its darkest tribute. And he came home to find that his father was already dead, undone by a sail nobody had thought to change. It is easy to remember Theseus for the maze, the thread, and the monster he killed in the dark. It is worth remembering, too, that a hero can walk out of the most dangerous place in the world and still lose, on the way home, the two people who trusted him most through nothing more dramatic than a promise he simply forgot to keep. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.